Okay, here we go.
There we go.
So we got Rick Goffe. Sorry, Goffe. Is it Goffe?
That's correct.
Goffe.
Goffe is correct.
So Rick Goffe. So we have here Rick Goffe on the Founder's Dilemma, and today is the 30th of May, 2023. And Rick has devised this this online game. It's a whodunit that you can play with your friends to discover who the murderer is and and then you get bumped off the game until you discover him. So everyone else is detectives. So one person plays the murderer, everyone else is detectives. If you don't detect fast enough, you get killed and you're out the game. Is that a good summary of your
Absolutely, it's a good summary of it, and that's we have a timer built into it to keep the motivation on the person who's the murderer, so that they keep trying to eliminate people as fast as they can from the game. That's a very good summary.
Okay, well, now I'm back from my travels in Europe. I'm going to try and gather some people together and give it a go, but I haven't had an opportunity to yet. So tell me, Rick, what have you been doing up until you start? And remind me the name of the game again.
The name of the game is Backstabbers.
Backstabbers, yes. And it's primarily mobile. Is it primarily mobile, or is it desktop and mobile?
It's solely mobile. It's solely a mobile app at this point. I have considered it maybe on Steam as a PC, but that would just be to facilitate really putting it up onto larger screens so that people can see the game happening more in real time.
Right. So that would be an augmentation. Like the primary thing is still on the handheld.
Right.
You could see on the big screen who got eliminated or killed, and you'd have a better idea of what's going on. Okay, so that's great. So tell me, what have you been doing until Backstabbers? Because I know this is relatively new, isn't it?
It is relatively new, and surprisingly enough, I decided to launch a social deduction party game right at the tail end of a pandemic when nobody's getting together. So you can tell, leading up to this, it was a difficult decision to do this. But I had been in the tech industry for a lot of years, worked my way up through desktop publishing into the tech sector itself, then worked as a director for a large nonprofit, and eventually went into consulting for myself. And consulting is rewarding in many ways. You can help people breach pain spots and achieve success, but it also gets a little tedious at times too. I wanted something that spoke to a little bit more of my creative abilities. And so with that, I decided to segue into what I like to call learning another language yet again. When you're in tech, you learn a bunch of languages as you go through your evolutionary career. And I got to the point where I had learned Swift so that I could program for Apple apps and the Mac OS. But I didn't have enough knowledge really to segue into doing it also for the Android ecosystem. So anything I could design or build, I was kind of limited at. And from there, I made the decision to start working with somebody who would write in a language for me that would allow me to bridge that divide and be more focused on the design as opposed to building itself. And so I've gone all the way up.
Sorry, did you not code this yourself in the end?
No, I did not, for a change. This is something that I had built for me, and I've taken on an equity partner at a 10% stake, and his name is Matt, and his organization has allowed me to have this built largely in TypeScript and JavaScript, which is a language I just don't know yet. So I've got a learning curve ahead of me because now that I've got the Git repository set up on my machine, I have access to all the code. I can see the pushes and pulls. It's getting easier for me to read what's happening in my own environment now. And that was the toughest challenge of all of this, was to figure out whether or not I could actually steer something that I didn't have hands-on knowledge of on how it's implemented. Can I tell you how it's done in Swift? Can I tell you how it's done in C? Sure, but I can't tell you how it's done in JavaScript, and I can't tell you it's done in TypeScript or Flutter for that matter, if you're talking about other ecosystems.
Right. So what's the complete tech stack for this? You have TypeScript, JavaScript, and then what's the presentation layer?
That's and then those are packaged out for Android and Apple. And so you have to still create a package. So my knowledge of Swift and how packaging works came in handy, but again, I had to learn the whole Google ecosystem side of it, have a developer account there that I never had before, and things like that in order to maintain my publishing presence in both places. Underneath that, we've got your information is stored in Firebase from Google, which can be just a container on the back end or a series of containers, or you can upgrade that to a real-time database if your needs require it.
Interesting. So you mentioned the pandemic earlier. So what led you to the Backstabber game, and what problem do you think you're solving by producing it?
That's an interesting question, because I think there's sort of an intersection of problems that I'm trying to solve at once. The largest problem is that most games, whether they're digital as apps or board games or games that are more social for the television, they tend to focus our attention. 80 to 90% of our attention is focused on that game. And that takes away from socializing. And so I found that when we did get together, if somebody said, oh, let's play a game, it elicited a kind of a groan from me. I've driven hours to see people and and you want to play what? Monopoly? Come on. I don't want to spend all my time doing that. I want to spend my time socializing. And my game is what I call a background game. It occurs in the background. It counts on your abilities like observation, listening, deduction, induction, reasoning, and it doesn't make it the focus of getting together. It's just an add-on to your get-together. And that's because this comes from a parlor game called Wink Murder that's been around since the turn of the last century. Somewhere around the 1900s, when murder mystery was first fleshed out as a genre by Mr. Edgar Allan Poe and others who followed after him. This game was done as a parlor game where people would get together and they would talk and socialize, but it wasn't one that took over the gathering. It didn't interrupt the flow of social conversation. And so one person would be allowed to pick a card from a deck, and if they got that card, they were designated the murderer, just like our game does, picks out a person at random. And people would play this while they were socializing, and it was an add-on to the occasion, as opposed to it something being that takes over the occasion. If I have to sit here like this with my phone above my head in order to play a game with you, what am I focused on? Am I really having fun interacting with you, or am I, trying to be improvisational or clever, or, all of that to me felt like a detriment to socialization. And at a time when, this is where I say there's an intersection of problems, at a time when we're facing digital addiction at all levels. It's integrated into our TVs. Our kids, as you wrote in your blog, kids have this expectation of having a phone, of having access to that now. And it's not only, having the phone, but if you're one of those kids who gets the latest phone all the time, it's a status symbol, like new sneakers used to be to you or I, or getting that first television in your bedroom as a kid. You got somebody else's hand-me-down, you were happy to have it, and your parents knew immediately that you were not going to sleep normally anymore. You were going to stay up watching the TV, and they had to come in and turn it off or check on you or tell you to turn it off. And so when I read your blog post, it really resonated with me. I said, this is part of the problem, is this digital addiction. And so when you bring together people, and I noticed this happening, I think at Thanksgiving, where I noticed people right after dinner wanted to sit and read their phones. And I'm looking at it to see if people, in the house, all sitting there doing their phone thing. And I said, this, I understand there's a need to, reconnect, maybe to post pictures of your meal, whatever it is that you normally do. But we do face, all of us, some level of addiction to this stuff. It's not just kids.
So how does another digital game solve the digital addiction problem? It seems like a contradiction.
Well, it's interesting because I like the way you put the question. Is it a war worth waging? Are we becoming Sisyphus because we're part of an older generation that says you can't live this way all the time? We don't want to walk around with augmented headsets on in the street. We'll be bumping into each other. So everybody wants augmented reality glasses so you can see through to the real world and see this other world overlaid onto it. It's never going to go away. But games like mine take the human element and put it in the foreground. and put the technology in the background. So when you're
Right.
playing the game, you're spending more time paying attention to what people are doing. That's the focus of winning the game, is that's where all your facts and clues are. Somebody had said in a comment one time, but there are no clues. I said, you need clues given to you to make it easy? Or do you need to look at what's going on and be more, as people say, mindful about your surroundings, be more present in the moment and less paying attention to your phone? You would only pay attention to your phone for if you're out, somebody, the murderer has knocked you out and you're out of the game, or vice versa. You think you know who the murderer is, so you pull up the phone and you dial in and you designate the person. Beyond that, it's an occasional check the phone to see who's in or out of the game. And you go back to just we used to play to the family, and we'd have people cooking a meal in the kitchen. My aunt had this old house, it was an old colonial, and it had, tons of bedrooms, like 5 or 6 bedrooms in it, and a big porch off the back. And so people would be playing volleyball out back. A bunch of people would be prepping a meal. It had a parlor with a piano, so somebody be in there playing and singing. We were all over the place, and you could play this game all weekend long. People would be in, out, mixing, focusing on what they're doing, having a good time together. My father with the fireworks blowing up the neighborhood. Oh my God. There were things that you counted on doing together. And if you played a game, like we were all fans of card games and things like that, but it took away from doing stuff together. Yeah. And this game, you can keep living your life, keep doing things in the real world, and still play this game at the same time.
Cool. Okay. Well, that's a really good problem to solve. I like that. Let's see how it works. I mean, how's the reception been so far? When did you launch?
I guess I want to say there's slow adoption, and there's a trickiness with getting the message across, because that's a lot for me to explain to somebody what the benefits are. So trying to get that into a short enough hook to get people interested to look beyond the surface. That's hurdle 1 in the funnel. Getting people to either a homepage or a product page on one of the storefronts, that's hurdle number 2. That one's the toughest one to get. And there, maybe 25 out of 100 are taking the time to download. So there's a predictable conversion rate of interest, and I think people see the value in it. The question is whether or not I'm, because I'm new at some things here, whether or not I'm getting that message across the right way. Is it uniformly being broadcast? Am I utilizing all the tools that are available to me properly to my advantage? And not being a marketer, but being around marketing since I was 15, doing paste up and layout for magazines. I understand how ads are built and how they work and what leading the eye is. And so I have a deep understanding of that stuff. But from the PR point of view, from an expression point of view, I've had to try to continuously reword what I know into simple ways that people will understand. And that's where things like ChatGPT are a big help, because you can put in a premise like mine and say, give me a quick synopsis of this, or give me a clever synopsis, or give me a hook to get people to read more about this. And that's less that I have to think about on a perpetual basis, because it allows some back and forth with somebody that I'm not paying a dime for.
Right. That's cool. So you mentioned you have a 10% partner, but before we go there, talking about your partner and the relationship, what else have you learned? I mean, you've talked about a number of things that you learned, but what's gone not so well, and what would you do differently? And also, because I'm not clear about the timeline, when did you actually start this? So pandemic was like a 3-year thing. So when did you actually start?
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I've been thinking about it for a long time, thinking about a project that I wanted to work on that I felt would make a difference, as well as provide entertainment for people. And I finally solidified that idea right, I would say, this is May, I would say incorporated in 22, and that was June. And I had started work in January in the project, so probably the fall before that. So that's 2021. I started conceiving it in the fall,
Right.
And by December, I was on the path to getting incorporated and finding somebody to work with as a fractional chief technology officer through Upwork.
Right.
So they could come
That's
on board
interesting.
and help me flesh out the MVP.
So where are they based? The person you found on Upwork?
He is now based in Philadelphia. He was located somewhere else, but he was going to be moving back to Philadelphia, which is the area he grew up from. His name is Matt, and his company is Trout House Tech.
I see. And did you want domestic partner as in domestic as in US, or were you open to anywhere?
Honestly, I was kind of open to anywhere. You talk a lot about no code, and I did a lot of research into that before I began the project and began a design for the MVP. I started doing some of the prototyping in Backendless, which is more Pillar and that whole group for no code. Great, because they have a nice infrastructure that teaches you, so they've got a built-in, education system so you can learn how their no code works. And it helps to understand what a REST API is,
Yeah.
So there's good things to no code, but there's some things that it helps to know going into it. And so I looked at those things, and then I came up with this person, because I needed to work with somebody who could really put this together into a stack for me.
At which point did you realize this was something you couldn't do alone?
From the get-go, I would say. From the get-go, because I knew no code was going to have a steep learning curve because of what I wanted to do with the app. It's it's a surprisingly simple app, but somewhat complicated on the back end to keep the way authentication works working. Meaning, not everybody who plays the game has to register. Only the person who wants to set up the game and host a game has to register, so that we keep bots out of the system. And then you, as the average person who wants to just play the game, can download it, join the game, put in nothing more than a name and the code for joining the group, and then you can delete it when you're done if you don't want it anymore.
Oh, cool. Okay, that's really good. Yeah, I was actually wondering about that, how you're going to get buy-in from, say, 12 family members, some of whom are, digital natives and some of whom are, digital novices.
Right.
How are you going to get buy-in from all these different groups? I was wondering about that. Okay, so that's
Right,
clever. So you don't have to sign up.
If you want grandma to play, you can get it set up on her phone or her iPad, and it'll run, and she can play along. And she doesn't have to leave any information with me. And when she's done, she can delete it. It's as simple as that. Because I know how much everybody values digital privacy nowadays, and how much all of these apps want to know about us. As we put them on our phones, it's like, do you want to track me across applications? Heck no. There should be a heck no answer, button in there. That's,
Yeah. So you're really solving for privacy there. That's great. That's one problem. And then how do you keep the notifications to a reasonable quantity? Because I'm assuming, because from what you're saying, and this I didn't know before this conversation, so how do you keep notifications at the right level, like not pinging every 2 seconds and not pinging just once every 2 hours or something? What do you consider the right amount of notifications?
Are you talking about communication between app and server, or are you talking about communication between app and person, like notification?
No, I think we'll leave the technical server authentication, all that stuff. We'll leave that out. I'm talking about from the human point of view. I put it on my phone, and then it's not blowing up my phone, but
there are no notifications. The only thing we ask you to allow it to do is allow for notifications so that the phone updates properly, so that the display of people in and out of the game gets updated properly at the right intervals. Beyond that, there's no notifications. We don't send you any text unless you're registering. Then there's a code to register for text. So when you sign up, it gives you a code, you input it, and then it says, okay, you're a valid user. But beyond that, we talked about notifications, like maybe let's make the phone buzz every time he's knocked out of the game. Well, that's annoying. You know what I mean? I can easily
That's an interesting decision. A lot of people would have gone the other way.
Overkill. You can look at the phone if you want to know who's in or out. Somebody can say verbally that they're out right now. That can be the notification. If you need that as a group, you can, all agree upon that. But there's a protocol in the system, and it's designed to give a little bit of protection to the murderer, so that if I'm the murderer and I knock you out of the game, right?
Yeah.
Somebody can see that we're having a conversation right now. And so you pull out your phone and you hit the button and knock yourself out of the game. Now somebody watching could make the assumption, oh, he's eliminating himself out of the game. But they don't get verification of that. There's at least 10 seconds before your phone and my phone update to show that you're out of the game. And then 30 seconds before everybody else's phone updates, to give that murderer a chance to walk away from the scene of the crime. So you've got to recall where people were, not just where people are.
Oh, so wait, you have to be in proximity to murder somebody in your game?
Yes.
You have to be next to them?
Okay. And that's the joy of it, is that it's all about trying to be close, trying to be a little bit more subversive. So you've got 4 options. You can wink at somebody, and that's decided at the outset of the game. It's picked by the host. And if you want to verbally talk about it, like say you're with a group of people and so really doesn't want you winking at their wife. Okay. So there's 3 other gestures in the game that are hand gestures that you can use. So this is the hand gesture. See if this, yeah. So this is the hand gesture, and I flip this to you quietly. If somebody spots that, they're going to know. They're going to know that you're the killer. But if you can do it quietly, under an whatever you got to do it without somebody seeing, then you can get away with it. And so you should have time to move away from that person after that encounter occurs, so that people have to make a judgment call and not just a sight-on scene as well. There should be some inductive reasoning and some deductive reasoning.
So could this work if people are remote, or do you have to be together?
You really need to have physical interaction. I mean, in theory, you could do it as an asymmetrical kind of game. Let's say you lived on a campus and you don't live all in the same suite together, so you can't play together.
Yeah.
But you all see each other during the course of the day at this building, at the meal hall, at this particular seminar, you're all together, yada, yada. Yeah. And so you could play that way and get it set up and just let it run over the course of 24 hours. And the nice thing is that if you want to play it that way, asymmetrically, like we would play it over the course of a weekend. And sometimes you get 2 or 3 games done over a weekend. Sometimes you'd only get 1 or 2 because your murderer is very good. It took a long time to figure out. My grandmother was the best. She picked a spot on the porch. She was like the Black Widow spider. She just let people pass through the porch and would murder them as they came by. She would, start a little conversation and boom, murder them. She was very good at it. And so there isn't, there's an appeal there to broad ages alike, I think, because I was 12, maybe about the same age as your kid getting the phone, 11, 12, like that age.
Yeah, that blog post is from a while ago, but carry on.
But when you're that age, you're looking to become more social. People are trying to individuate at that age. They are looking to interact more. And I was the only child in a very large family of like 15 adults. So you can tell half the conversations, they didn't want the kid around for, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. Yeah. But they were very polite about it. And they came up with ways to do things like this that were fun for everybody. So whether my grandmother was, looking bored or I was looking bored, you could draw people back into the mix playing this game.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
And it is its own point of conversation. And I was hoping that at some level that people would recognize that if you're looking to get to know people, let's say at a barbecue, right? You move in a neighborhood, you get to know all your neighbors. Try and remember all those names. I'm terrible at that. If you give me a list of names that I have to memorize all the time, I can do that. I used to be able to memorize 125 usernames and passwords and their full names and the correct spelling. That was my thing, before we blew up as a company. I could do that much from memory. But if you take me to a cocktail party and you introduce me to 5 people in a row, I will have trouble remembering who's who. It's just the way my brain processes things. I have to repeat.
I can't do either of those things. Memorize a big list or remember people's names. I remember their faces, and what they do and where they live and how old their children are, but I never remember their names.
And the more you make a connection with them, the easier it is to remember them. And my feeling was that with this game, if you have everybody's picture and their name all in one place while you're getting to know each other, voila. There's no reason why you can't remember somebody's name, because it's right in front of you. Just a
Right.
little, like get to know you kind of thing. It does make an interesting tool for people. And I'm hoping that some people notice that. Again, where do I go with that message? Am I going to, the party planners or the corporate America people who look to build those additions into their infrastructure? That's a marketing question. That's where there's always a certain amount of struggle to figure out which way to go with marketing.
Right. So let me ask you, what would you do differently? Like, you've gotten to this point. What lessons have you learned in terms of, you talked about, using no code to start the MVP, and maybe you'd have chosen a different platform, or maybe what would you have done differently from where you are?
There's a number of things. And I think that's always because hindsight is 20/20. But looking back, I look at certain segments of functionality. Like when we brought the Android version online, we had problems with it. And I didn't insist on testing enough. I had tested sufficiently with the Apple product and thought that the translation would be much more straightforward, and the behavior to be as normal as the other one and as reliable as the other one. And it was not. It was giving me a problem for like a month and a half. We had issues with registration that couldn't be solved for some reason. They were having trouble with the code. And again, this goes back to being cross-platform. There's always going to be some difference level. And that's why that's where I said from the get-go, I know I'm out of my element,
Yeah. Well, even Android to Android, because Android is such a wide ecosystem. You've got, and I don't know what version of Android you support, but the point is that Apple is pretty constrained, and then Android is just like all over the place. You could have like a 3-inch Android phone or 15-inch tablet or something,
right.
Maybe not 15-inch, but a 13-inch tablet. You could, so I don't know how that works, to be honest.
But the lesson learned there is do more testing as opposed to less. Anytime you think you should do more testing, you should do it, especially before it goes live. And that was my mistake. It was live and there were problems. And so I had to stem that tide. That's something you learn the hard way. I should have done more testing. I know that after years and years and years, but we make assumptions about how things work sometimes. And that came up to bite me a little bit. So that I would do differently. Would I change the stack to no code? Not necessarily. There was one of the pieces you have on your site that talks about building an MVP and what really an MVP is. And if you look at my product, it has no bells and whistles right now. It is just the game. It is the game. It's free. There's no advertising. It's clean. It's the code I'm going to copyright. And while I subscribe to this model of getting the basic MVP out there for product market fit, which is what I'm trying to hit, there's a lack of available options when you go with a minimalist approach. And this is something that I've had a conversation with Matt ongoing about, and it delves into whether or not to monetize. Having the basic game with no extra features is just a concept, and people may just walk away from a concept. It may not have enough to keep them interested. It is a simple game. And so one of the things that I've been unhappy with is not having that toolbox of the extra features to use as promotional value. To say, oh, this feature that you would normally pay $1 for, if you play today and you register and I'll give you a code that gives you that for free. That gets people more interested. They feel like they're getting something, And then there's the question of whether or not to monetize the hosting process down the road. If it's popular with people, do you then monetize the registration and the hosting process where you pay X number amount for the year to have access to this? Is it worth it? Is it something that somebody's going to pay for? Or is this going to be something that we can make popular and sell bells and whistles and advertising space on? There's a big question about how to do that. And while you have to iterate, you have to get it out there to start getting feedback. It really would help to have 1 or 2 bells and whistles to go along with it. And I feel like that's a mistake I would have made, and I'm busy remedying that because we're building a feature right now that's called the Backstabber takeover feature. So if you guess correctly and you figure out that I'm the murderer, I'm the backstabber, well, then you can take over my role. You can take over, and then it should confuse people even more.
Oh, I see.
And so the question is, do we monetize that?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, or do I put it out there for free in the sakes of trying to build up more adoption? And
Right.
that's
So,
really my hardest part, is adoption. Because while I grew up in a large family, a very large family, that's at a certain point in my life went in every direction possible. And now my friends refer to me as a recluse. You know, I spend more time in front
yeah.
of a computer than I do getting out there these days. And
Right.
and that goes back to the discussion we had on digital addiction. I love my job, I love my work, and so it's easy to do around the clock. But you got to
Yeah.
walk away from it. Like as I said, 3 days doing power washing a deck, something to walk away from it. I went and saw a friend of
Yeah.
mine compete in a comedy competition in New York City, and he won. You know, it was a
Yeah.
great day for him and had a great time out, and just away from all the digital stuff for a couple of
Yeah.
hours, you know.
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. Let's see. Right. So the next question is, are you self-funded or do you have a backer? I know you divided the equity 10%. You mentioned that 10% has gone to the developer of the equity, but is there any other source of funding that you guys have?
And really, what they did was they provided me with a very deeply discounted amount for coding for me. You know, so it's
Right.
like a third of their normal rate for coding,
Oh, right.
and they
Oh,
get
great. Yeah.
and they get an equity percentage. But beyond that, it's all funded by me. You know, it's all coming out of my pocket. Would I like an investor? Sure, I would love to have an investor who actually saw the vision, who saw what we're trying to do, saw the difference that it could make with people trying to keep their kids from spending all their time on the phone, or even themselves for that matter, you know, if they understand that level of it. But
Mm.
I don't have traction yet. And so I wouldn't be ready to pair up with another investor who is ready to push yet, because I don't feel like I have the product market fit just yet. I got to figure out who's really interested in this more than others are. You know, there's a demographic there, and some of it's emerging. The 18 to 34 group, definitely an emerging group, the strongest group of all who have interest in the product. But ironically, once you start to get out to like 35, 45, 55, there's a diminishment. People at that age are a little more focused on their lives and a little less focused on all the digital stuff, I guess.
Mm.
But when you start to hit the 65 range, there's an interest group again. So the people 65 and older are actually interested in this product.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so there's a feeling that I've had with people who contribute to my creative process that says there's room for this product in care homes. There's room for this product on cruise ships for families. There's room for this product at, you know, resorts. It's a question of how to get the message to these people and how to get them on board as key stakeholders, so that they have a valuated tool in their pocket to offer their clientele, so to speak, like that.
What about team building for corporations, stuff like that?
Exactly the same thing. Same thing. It's on that list.
It would feel like a good fit to me.
There's a post I have on, I think it's on LinkedIn, that you can find about that.
Okay.
It could be a tool for team building in offices. And in fact, one of the groups that I approached with the idea in the beginning about the cost of coding the project is what's their name again? I think their name is Fueled. Is their name? They're app designers and developers downtown, somewhat award-winning.
Possibly, yeah. Mhm.
And they do a game night, and I was trying to get them to play the game in-house, you know, when I prototype together.
Yeah.
So there's a way for me to even show, you know, if I wanted to do a complete upgrade of the entire interface and have a new group do it, here it is, take it as is. And at least with the MVP, I can get that into the door and show people, you know, or an investor say, here it is, it's working. This is the concept. These people are interested in it. So I've gotten that far in terms of information. The question is now, what are people willing to pay for?
Right. So, and talking of money, so you're self-funded. Are you working? Are you still consulting in the meantime to make money to keep feeding the project, or you're working off savings, or?
This came out of pocket savings, and it was something that they had gotten through family. And it was, incidental. It occurred. And then I happened to have this idea on the back burner, and I wanted to be like I was now as a consultant, where you have a certain amount of independence. I wanted to stay in that sort of captain seat. I wanted to stay on my own. I didn't want to go to work for somebody else. And so, no, this is all out of pocket, and I'm not currently working to fund it, but I am considering, because it's taking more time to gain adoption than I thought, there is some other things that I'm already starting to think about in terms of other work. And this speaks to having to learn some JavaScript, finally. I've started looking at programs like BuildBox and Unity for building games that are more traditional. And so I may release another product in the next 6 months if I find something interesting that I want to build in the background. I kind of, I don't want to go back to the traditional world of work like that. A 9-to-5 job just doesn't hold my interest long enough.
Fair enough. So if this takes off, if Backstabbers takes off and you're doing great, is there an exit strategy? Would you ever sell Backstabbers to somebody else if they took, because I know there's a passion, it's obvious that there's a high degree of passion in this project. It speaks to, the huge house where you were all together and you were playing these games together, and your grandmother was killing everybody and nobody knew it was her. Yeah, and that's brilliant. But is there an exit strategy ultimately?
I definitely think it's wise to always consider that question, and I'm sort of glad that you had asked it, because it's something I think about often, is that if it took off, and of course it comes down to who came to me and wanted to buy it, really. If you were Inner Sloth, the makers of Among Us, and they said, okay, we've got the online space, we've got virtual reality covered with our game, but we don't have a real in-world version of our game. We want your game, and we want to rewrite the rules so that it matches our game a little bit more, and we want to rebrand it, and go ahead. I'm 54. I don't have that many years left. I'd like to not work all the way to the end. So yeah, I would be willing to work with them. But if, Procter & Gamble said, we want something like this in our portfolio, I'd be like, you're Procter & Gamble. How are you going to take this project on? What's your vision for it? There's an understanding of scope of what I do. And so it would have to be appropriate, the person who is approaching me like that, to the scope of what I do. But that's not to say I wouldn't rule out the generic investor who comes in and says, okay, you've got X sales, you've got this period of time, this is your valuation, I'm willing to give you that. I understand that process very, very well,
Well, the other problem you may come across, from my limited understanding, is that if it takes off, it might start costing you serious money to keeping everything going, and you might run out of runway really quickly. I know a number of startups where that's happened. It's not because anything was wrong. Everything was right. The only thing that was wrong was that their pockets weren't deep enough to fund the runway, and then they suddenly run out of cash, and then they're out business. So do you have any kind of contingency plan for such an eventuality?
Well, what I try to do is I try to limit my exposure to recurring cost on a regular basis. There were things like the storage for Firebase, which if it took off, it could start costing me money, but not enough money for me to not be able to fund it. Do you know what I mean? The monthly on what those storage costs are minimal. Beyond that, there's a maintenance of all the regular things like website, social media presences, all of that stuff. I do all myself, and I do it with little to no cost. I've had to give in and get a check mark on Twitter, because otherwise they want you to go through a relentless approval program and spend $10,000 a month with them as an advertiser to be verified. I'm like, I'll just pay the $8.99 a month so I can keep advertising on Twitter. That's where the costs come up, is advertising. For me, trying to get the message out is expensive. Hosting the product is cheap. It's built. It doesn't require a lot of ongoing development.
Interesting. Very interesting. So, well, I wish you all the best with Backstabber, Rick. And it's
Thank
been a
you.
real pleasure speaking with you today. And I'll check back in with you in a couple of months' time, see how everything's going.
I would like that. I appreciate being asked, and I enjoyed the process, and I enjoyed reading more about what your organization does and some of the insights out on your blog about how some of your interests kind of dovetail with mine there.
Yeah, well, we're pretty much the same generation, so that's not too surprising. Okay, well, thanks so much. Take care.
You too. Oh, take care.